Habit number 6. In order to break the habit of ignorance, engage in self-examination. Root out your flaws. As I said, ignorance is not only being blind to the nature of one's real self. Ignorance is also being blind to the nature of one's unreal self, what the ascended masters call the dweller on the threshold. The great sage Sanat Kumara teaches in the Mahabharata, "He that knoweth self also knoweth what is not self." Unfortunately, whether we realize it or not, we sometimes subscribe to the belief, what we don't know won't hurt us. It's like the Eskimo that asked the local missionary, "If I didn't know about God and sin, would I go to hell?" "No," said the priest. "Then why," asked the Eskimo in all sincerity, "did you tell me?" But our true spiritual teachers tell us that what we don't know will definitely hurt us. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus teaches, "Whoever knows the all but fails to know himself lacks everything." The Chinese sage Lao Tzu said, "Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is true wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power." In order to make spiritual progress, we must master ourselves, every part of ourselves. We must be willing to squarely acknowledge and face the ugly elements of our personality and our psychology. Make no mistake about it, it isn't easy. It takes courage. But you have that courage, and I know you will exercise it. It takes love, love of God and love of ourselves, and the love of the people we hurt when we don't get rid of our barbs. It takes hard work. You know the adage, no pain, no gain. Yet how many of us anesthetize ourselves so we won't have to feel the pain of our karma? We keep a veil of delusion around ourselves so we won't have to face reality. We avoid the people and the circumstances that represent our karma or that could help us see our faults more clearly. As the 19th century writer Thomas Carlyle once said, "The greatest of faults, I should say, is to be conscious of none." Teresa of Avila tells the story of a woman who avoided confronting her faults and thereby stifled her spiritual progress. She was very fond, says Teresa, of receiving communion frequently. She never said anything bad about anyone. She experienced devotion in her prayer and lived in constant solitude. She was so mild in her temperament that nothing said to her ever made her angry or say any bad word, for she was quite perfect. Since I saw all these virtues, it seemed to me they were effects of a very advanced soul and of deep prayer. And I esteemed this lady highly at the beginning, because I didn't see her offend God and understood that she guarded against doing so. But after getting to know her, I began to understand that all was peaceful as long as her self-interest was not affected. But when her own interests were at stake, her conscience was not so delicate, but actually easygoing. I learned that although she would suffer all the things that were said against her, she would not tolerate anything said against her reputation, even in some tiny point concerning her honor or the esteem she thought was her due. She was so overcome by this misery, so eager to know everything that was said against these, and so fond of her comfort, that I was amazed how such a person could live even an hour. She embellished all this in such a way that it appeared free from sin. I was really bewildered. Almost everyone considered her to be a saint, although I observed that she must have been somewhat at fault for the persecutions she underwent. And I did not envy her manner of living and sanctity. Rather, she and 2 other souls that I have seen in this life, who were saints in their own opinion, caused me more fear after I spoke with them than all the sinners I have seen. I beg the Lord to give us light. There are souls whom, it seems, nothing keeps from flying off to heaven. They seek perfection in everything, in their opinion, but there is no one to inform them of their faults. These so-called saints that Teresa is describing, who are really egotists, remind me of a story Archbishop Fulton Sheen once told, the story of the egotist who went to the doctor for a headache. The doctor asked him, "Do you feel a distressing pain in the forehead?" "Yes," said the patient. "And a rather throbbing pain in the back of the head?" "Yes." "And piercing pains here at the side?" "Yes." "Ah," the doctor explained, "your halo is on too tight." As Teresa of Avila says, one way to figure out if your halo is on too tight is to associate with people who will lovingly point out to you your faults. Another way to overcome self-ignorance is to go about it systematically. A method for doing just that was created by that eminently practical American who brought us the world's first subscription library, the first lightning rod, and the first bifocals. His name was? Right. In his autobiography, Franklin tells of a simple but effective system for self-examination that worked for him. It's a great way to overcome self-ignorance and attain self-knowledge. Franklin explains that when he was in his 20s, he conceived of the bold and arduous project of arriving at moral perfection. He referred to it as the art of virtue. "I wished to live without committing any fault at any time," he writes. "As I knew or thought I knew what was right and wrong, I did not see why I might not always do the one and avoid the other. But I soon found out I had undertaken a task of more difficulty than I had imagined. While my care was employed in guarding against one fault, I was often surprised by another. Habit took the advantage over intention. Inclination was sometimes too strong for reason." From this, Franklin concluded that the mere desire to be virtuous was not enough to prevent his slipping. He realized that the contrary habits must be broken and good ones acquired. In order to accomplish this, Franklin devised the following method. First, he made a list of moral virtues and grouped them under 13 headings. Here is his list. You might want to write it down. The first moral virtue on his list is temperance. And then he gives himself directions under that. He says, number 1, temperance. Eat not to dullness. Drink not to elevation. He notes that temperance can also be interpreted as moderating every other pleasure, appetite, inclination, or passion, bodily or mental, even to our avarice and ambition. Temperance sounds like Gautama Buddha's middle way. Second moral virtue, silence. Speak not but what may benefit others or yourself. Avoid trifling conversation. Moral virtue number 3, order. Let all your things have their places. Let each part of your business have its time. Fourth moral virtue, resolution. Resolve to perform what you ought. Perform without fail what you resolve. The corollary is, do not resolve what you do not find you are able to perform. Make only those resolutions in that which you are determined to do. Fifth moral virtue, frugality. Make no expense but to do good to others or yourself. That is, waste nothing. Waste nothing. Sixth moral virtue, industry. Lose no time. Be always employed in something useful. Cut off all unnecessary actions. Seventh moral virtue, sincerity. Use no hurtful deceit. Think innocently and justly, and if you speak, speak accordingly. Eighth moral virtue, justice. Wrong none by doing injuries or omitting the benefits that are your duty. Ninth moral virtue, moderation. Avoid extremes. Forbear resenting injuries so much as you think they deserve. 10th moral virtue, cleanliness. Tolerate no uncleanliness in body, clothes, or habitation. 11th moral virtue, tranquility. Be not disturbed at trifles or at accidents common or unavoidable. 12th moral virtue, chastity. Rarely use venery but for health or offspring, never to dullness, weakness, or the injury of your own or another's peace or reputation. Venery, spelled V-E-N-E-R-Y, is indulgence in sexual desire. 13th moral virtue, humility. Imitate Jesus and Socrates. That's all he says. If you do that, you will know true humility. Franklin says that his list originally included only 12 virtues, but he added humility as the 13th. He says, "When a Quaker friend kindly informed me that I was generally thought proud, that my pride showed itself frequently in conversation, that I was not content with being in the right when discussing any point, but was overbearing and rather insolent, of which he convinced me by mentioning several instances." In other words, Ben Franklin admits that his halo was on too tight. Having settled on his 13 virtues, Franklin made a little book where he could grade himself on his progress in acquiring these virtues. This is how he set it up. You can see a slide on the screen that will show you. At the top of each page, he wrote the name of a different virtue. Under that virtue, he wrote the precepts of that virtue that I read to you. For instance, the first page was headed Temperance. Under it, he wrote, "Eat not to dullness, drink not to elevation." The second page was headed Silence, and so on. Even though each page was devoted to a separate virtue, every page had a chart that listed all 13 virtues. That's on the left side of it. He listed the virtues down the vertical left-hand column signified by the first letter of the virtue. So the left-hand column had the letters going from top to bottom, T, S, O, R, F, I, S, J, M, C, T, C, H. Then he wrote the first letter of each day of the week across the top of the page and divided the page into 7 columns, one for each day of the week. In this way, he had a grid where each day he could grade himself on each virtue. He would do this every evening. For instance, on Monday evening, he would go down the Monday column and mark a little black spot in the box of the virtue he had not exemplified. He would focus on one virtue per week, but he would grade himself daily and weekly on all of them. He writes, "I determined to give a week's strict attention to each of the virtues successively. Thus, in the first week, my great guard was to avoid the least offense against temperance, leaving the other virtues to their ordinary chance." Thus, if in the first week I could keep my first line, marked T for temperance, clear of spots, I suppose the habit of that virtue so much strengthened and its opposite weakened that I might venture extending my attention to include the next, and for the following week keep both lines clear of spots. Proceeding thus to the last, I could go through a course complete in 13 weeks and 4 courses in a year. This is a very unique mind that has arisen out of all humanity to be one of our great founding fathers. He's very ambitious and very meticulous. Franklin says that by this system he could be like a gardener. A gardener does not attempt to eradicate all the weeds at once because this would exceed his reach and his strength, but instead he works on one of his beds at a time. Having weeded the first, he proceeds to a second, following the same procedure for weeding out faults, Franklin says. I hoped to have the encouraging pleasure of seeing on my pages the progress I made in virtue by clearing successively my lines of their spots, till in the end, by a number of courses, I should be happy in viewing a clean book after a 13 weeks daily examination. I entered upon the execution of this plan for self-examination and continued it with occasional intermissions for some time. I was surprised to find myself so much fuller of faults than I had imagined. But I had the satisfaction of seeing them diminish. With regard to the virtue of order, he writes, in truth, I found myself incorrigible with respect to order. He laments that he fell far short of the perfection he wanted to attain. Yet, he says, I was by the endeavor of striving for it a better and a happier man than I otherwise should have been if I had not attempted it at all. In later years, when he was very busy traveling and dealing with a multiplicity of affairs, he was not able to put much attention on grading himself. But, says Franklin, I always carried my little book with me. He writes in his autobiography that his descendants should take this lesson from his art of virtue. It may well be that to this little artifice, with a blessing of God, their ancestor owed the constant felicity of his life down to his 79th year in which this is written. So much for Benjamin Franklin. Another way to cultivate the habit of engaging in self-examination and rooting out your flaws is to examine the motives behind your actions. Ketsen Sangpo Rinpoche, a Tibetan Buddhist priest and scholar, tells how a Gadamba Geshe cultivated this habit. A Geshe is the Tibetan Buddhist equivalent of a doctor of theology. It is very important to realize, Ketsen Sangpo says, that the effects of virtuous and non-virtuous thoughts and wishes can be extremely powerful. Even if a person appears to be engaging in virtue, if his motivation is evil, the effect will be very bad. Therefore, it is necessary to be mindful at all times and aware of your motivation and thoughts. In this way, if your mind is carried away by bad thoughts or poor motivation, you will be able to stop them. How should such mindfulness and introspection be used? A Gadamba Geshe was expecting a visit from his patrons, so he rose early and made his house very beautiful, cleaning it well and attractively arranging offerings on his altar. When he had finished, he sat on his meditation cushion and revived his mindfulness and introspection to analyze what he had just been doing. Very quickly he understood that his cleaning and arranging had been motivated by a desire for praise and a wish to receive further donations from his patrons. He rose, took a handful of dirt, and sprinkled it everywhere, on top of the offerings, into the water in the bowls, and over the floor. Then he sat down again on his meditation cushion and beat his breast, saying, "O monk, do not be so careless. You must take care. The arriving patrons were surprised to hear the loud noise and to find the house in such chaos. "What is wrong?" they asked. "Did a robber come?" The Geshe told them, "The robber that made this mess was not physical but mental." The great Indian teacher Bodhidharma was visiting Tibet at this time, and when, through his clairvoyance, he realized that the Kadamba Geshe had done, he said, "There is no better practitioner of doctrine in Tibet than he." He covered with dirt the head of the being who threatened to draw him down into a bad rebirth. The being, of course, was his dweller on the threshold. The same Kadamba Geshe once came to recite religious books at the home of his patrons, who went out after he had finished, leaving a container of tea within reach of where he sat. In his own meditation hut, he had no such tea, so it occurred to him to take some of the tea while the others were outside. As he was reaching for it, his mindfulness and introspection returned, and he immediately began shouting, "Robber, robber!" The patrons came running into the room and said, "Where is he? Where is the robber?" The Geshe replied, "A monk is robbing you. It is my own hand. Would you kindly cut it off?" By being always mindful and introspective, continues Ketsun Sangpo, you can develop the superior view, and your own behavior will be without blemish. Perhaps Benjamin Franklin was a bodhisattva in our midst. Indeed, it is very difficult for ordinary people not to have unworthy thoughts, but the most important point is not to be carried away by them when they arise, and through mindfulness and introspection to avoid becoming stuck in them. Well, there's an old saying, if you have been tempted into evil, fly from it. It is not falling into the water, but lying in it that drowns. Some of you know that one of El Moria's mottos is, if the messenger be an ant, heed him. Or as the author of Hebrews advises, be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares. You never know when an angel or a master will come knocking at your door in the person of a friend or a stranger. I want to tell you that when I was a student in Boston, still looking for direct contact with those in embodiment who knew Saint Germain, I decided that I had to put myself on a course of self-discipline, and this self-discipline was based on being obedient to the voice of God within. I also decided that whatever came into my life or whatever was around me was possibly the product of my own state of consciousness. And so I thought that I should take responsibility for those things that were near me or in the city or even on the planet. What part did my state of consciousness play in it, and what could I do to purify my consciousness? So this motto of El Moria reminds me of what happened to me one day as I was in a bus. Moria says, if the messenger be an ant, heed him. And in this case, my messenger was an ant eater. I was riding along in the bus, going where I was going, and I was meditating and fully involved in my fiery determination that I was going to find Saint Germain no matter what. And so I looked out the window and I saw someone walking an anteater on a leash. Now, I already thought in my own heart that an anteater was the most slothful, unwholesome of all animals, and to merely look upon one was of revulsion to me. So here I was sitting in the bus, and I saw this anteater, and I said to myself, what is the matter with you that you have seen an anteater? So I decided that this anteater must be bringing me a message of something that I must do with my consciousness to be ready for Saint Germain. So whether it's an ant or an anteater, do something about it when you are approached. Another motto you should remember is, don't be afraid to make mistakes. As someone once said, the road to wisdom, well, it's plain and simple to express. Err, and err, and err again, but less and less and less. You might pronounce that word The man who makes no mistakes, said the Irish Bishop William Connor McGee, does not usually make anything. As I have taught you before, you have the right to make mistakes. Why else would God have given you free will? Free will is the grand and noble experiment whereby you achieve individuality in God. So every Chela has that right. When a master takes on a Chela, he anticipates that the Chela will make mistakes in the course of his Chelaship. The Chela is going to learn either by obedience or by his own deliberations, and then some of his deliberations may result in inaccurate conclusions. So he will make some decisions that are mistakes and some decisions that are not mistakes, and he will learn. The masters are not going to throw you out if you make a mistake, and they are not interested in having robots for Chelas who walk around with a perpetual self-image that they are perfect people, or, on the contrary, that they are very imperfect people. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. It's not mistakes that cause you to fail. It's making the same mistake over and over again and not getting to the root of why you are doing it. That can cause your failure and be your undoing.
You're watching Elizabeth Clare Prophet, world-renowned author and founder of Summit University. Summit University is located at the beautiful Royal Teton Ranch in Park County, Montana, just north of Yellowstone National Park. If you'd like more information, call 1-800-245-5445. That's 1-800-245-5445.
Habit number 7. In order to break the habit of ignorance, see things as they really are. Desire to see things as they really are, and not as you wish them to be. Do not engage in wishful thinking. So this habit is, see things as they really are. In order to see things as they really are, we need to try to see things the way Christ Jesus would see them, to look at things objectively through the Christ mind. Seeing things as they really are is not seeing through the evil eye or the jaundiced eye of bigotry, prejudice, or criticism. And it is not seeing through the sympathetic eye that indulges the human ego rather than dispensing the true compassion of the Christ that heals the human condition and then goes beyond it. Seeing things the way they really are is learning that the way you have been taught to see things, or the way you have been used to seeing them, is not the only way to see, and is not necessarily the best way. How often do we mentally put down another person simply because they are not like us, because they don't talk like us, or dress like us, or think like us? How often do we put down someone from another ethnic group because his way of life or mannerisms are different from ours? How often do we put down someone else's religion because their beliefs are not like ours, or so we think? Earlier, I defined ignorance as blindness to the true nature of one's real self and blindness to the true nature of one's unreal self. Ignorance is also blindness to the true nature of the real and unreal self of others. Ramakrishna advised, serve God who dwells in all beings. Krishna teaches in the Bhagavad Gita, God dwells in the heart of all beings, Arjuna. Thy God dwells in thy heart. The yogi sees himself in the heart of all beings, and he sees all beings in his heart. Why? Because the yogi knows that he is Atman, and that Atman is in every heart. Therefore he is one with all beings. And when he sees me in all, and he sees all in me, then I never leave him, and he never leaves me. And when a man sees that the God in himself is the same God in all that is, he hurts not himself by hurting others. Then he goes indeed to the highest path. End of the quote from Krishna. The Lord commanded the Israelites through Moses, "Thou shalt not avenge nor bear any grudge against the children of thy people." Resentment, revenge, and retaliation, getting rid of, avenging, and grudging others is so very important. Moses said, "Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself." This statement has two meanings. You will love your neighbor as you love yourself. And the second meaning is, you will love your neighbor because you know that the self that is in him is God, and that that same God self is your God self. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thine own God self. Jesus said, "Inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." Jesus Christ is the full manifestation of the Son of God. He is one with the Holy Christ self of each one of us, and therefore anything done to any part of life is done to the Christ of that life, and is therefore done to Jesus. One of the things that keeps us from seeing things as they really are is that criticism, condemnation, and judgment of others and of ourselves. The Masters El Morya and Saint Germain have repeatedly warned against the subtle and insidious habit of criticism, condemnation, and judgment. They have not told us that we should not have discrimination, that we should know right from wrong and light from darkness, and be able to read vibrations. They have simply said, do not criticize, condemn, or judge. They do not want us to be blind to good and evil in ourselves and one another. But do not condemn others for that condition, but pray for them. They remind us of the law of karma, which decrees that whatever we do, or think, or say, or feel, comes full circle to our doorstep for resolution. If we don't monitor our thoughts and feelings, then how can we even begin to discipline what goes forth from us as feeling, as thought, gathering more of its kind, circling the globe and returning to our doorstep, the full-grown plant of the seed that we sent out? Any harmful act, El Morya says, is referred to the Holy Christ self and becomes a part of the life record of the person who commits it. And it must one day be balanced before the lords of karma. Whether mankind like this idea, whether it appeals to them or not, the fact remains that it is pure truth. And I am determined to declare it, says Morya, as a protection to those who observe its precepts. He says, ever so frequently conceited individuals who count themselves exceedingly wise determine that they shall criticize or judge another. They do this although fully aware of the scriptures which clearly state the great law, judge not that ye be not judged, for with what judgment ye judge, ye shall be judged, and with what measure ye meet, it shall be measured to you again. That is from the New Testament, and it is a clear statement of the irrevocable law of karma. Morya continues, Saint Germain, aware of the seriousness of this law, has continuously admonished his students to stop all criticism, condemnation, and judgment. He knows that such acts always travel the full circle, back to the very door of the one sending them out. For God's laws are impersonal and impartial in their application and intent. When applied by human reason or observation to another without being voiced, criticism is mildly destructive. But when it is uttered aloud to another, it is amplified at least 10 times. En route to the one criticized, it gathers more of the elements of the mass mind's condemnation until it is an arrow both sharp and swift, finding easy penetration into the tender mind of the one to whom it is directed, unless that one is extremely alert and maintains a force field of the tube of light and of protection with calls to Archangel Michael and the sword of blue flame. You must be extremely alert to not be the victim at subconscious levels of other people's criticism, condemnation, and judgment, and not only of that, of their envy, jealousy, and ignorance, which saps you of your strength. When you feel you have no strength in your body, it is often because someone is lusting after your light. They want it so much, or they want what you have, that they draw it to themselves from you. El Moria's quote continues, "When released by a friend or relative to whom the individual is receptive, criticism often lodges within the subconscious mind to perform its work of destruction as an arrow of pestilence, silent, invisible, insidious." Moria says countless men and women of world stature have been hindered in their missions, and some have been completely diverted from their life plan by the deliberate or thoughtless acts of others through criticism. El Moria offers solutions to the bad habit of criticism, condemnation, and judgment. One of these solutions you should take to heart. He says, "Walk in another's moccasins." He once taught, "I have written on the momentum of criticism, condemnation, and judgment. Beware of its subtlety in your mind. Beware of its subtlety in your pride. Walk in another's moccasins," literally. If you find yourself being critical of someone, take on yourself a penance. Ask that one's Holy Christ self and the Lords of Karma to give you that one's moccasins for 24 hours. See how you feel bearing that one's karma and burden. See how you come to know what striving your brothers and sisters may have in their hearts that you do not see, whereby they accomplish their daily tasks against odds you know not of, and conditions in the body that try them. End of quote. Another factor that prevents us from seeing things as they really are is jumping to conclusions. Sometimes the mind is like a grasshopper. It literally jumps to conclusions. It reacts to a situation out of ignorance rather than responding with thoughtful consideration. We assume somebody did such and such a thing based on hearsay, rumor, gossip, and tales told many times over, with a variation on the theme each time. The 19th century humorist Josh Billings once said, "The trouble ain't that people are ignorant, it's that they know so much that ain't so." Mark Prophet always used to say, "Whenever you assume instead of getting the facts firsthand, you make an ass out of you and me." ASSUME. Assume. Every Chila around here who approaches me with the word assume, "I assume that I should do this," gets stopped right there, and we go into this lesson. So don't assume anything. The Buddhist scholar Nyanaponika Thera teaches that one antidote for the bad habit of jumping to conclusions is to look and wait and see. He says, generally we are more concerned with handling and using things than with knowing them in their true nature. Thus we usually grasp in haste the very first few signals conveyed to us by a perception. Then, through deeply ingrained habit, those signals evoke a standard response by way of judgments, such as good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant, useful or harmful, right or wrong. How can we curb our rash reactions and replace them by moments of mindfulness and reflection? To do so will depend on our capacity to stop and pause, to apply the brakes at the right time, to say, wait a minute. In that practice, we train ourselves to look and wait, to suspend reactions or slow them down. Our motto should be, avoid hasty judgments. Gautama said, "He whose mind is concentrated sees things as they really are. A concentrated mind is a yang mind." Remember what the Taoist masters have taught. A yang mind is not moved by distracting thoughts or circumstances, either from within or without. A yang mind does not jump to conclusions. Another kind of ignorance that keeps us from seeing things as they really are is spiritual pride and intellectual conceit. Spiritual pride is believing that you are more spiritual than someone else, that you are spiritually a superior being to all other lesser mortals. Intellectual conceit is believing you are of superior intelligence, hence above those on the intellectual or the spiritual path. Babaji once gave his disciple Lahiri Mahasaya a lesson in humility. Babaji is an unascended Himalayan master who is said to have retained his physical form for centuries. Babaji had promised Lahiri, "I shall come whenever you need me." One day during a short vacation from his work, Lahiri attended a holy festival. He later recalled, "As I wandered amidst the throng of monks and holy men that had come from great distances to attend the holy festival, I noticed an ash-smeared ascetic who was holding a begging bowl. The thought arose in my mind that the man was hypocritical, wearing the outward symbols of renunciation without a corresponding inward grace. No sooner had I passed the ascetic than my astounded eye fell on Babaji. He was kneeling in front of a matted-haired anchorite. 'Guruji,' I exclaimed and hastened to his side. 'Sir, what are you doing here?' He replied, 'I am washing the feet of this renunciant, and then I shall clean his cooking utensils.' Babaji smiled at me like a little child. I knew he was intimating that he wanted me to criticize no one, but to see the Lord as residing equally in all body temples, whether of superior or inferior men. The great Guru added, 'By serving wise and ignorant holy men, I am learning the greatest of virtues, pleasing to God above all others, humility.'" In his story about Sannyasin and the butcher, Vivekananda shows us how spiritual pride and intellectual conceit can keep us from seeing things as they really are, especially ourselves. A sannyasin is someone who lives without possessions and has renounced the world. A young sannyasin went to a forest where he meditated, worshipped, and practiced yoga for a long time. After much hard work and practice, he was one day sitting under a tree when some dry leaves fell upon his head. He looked up and saw a crow and a crane fighting on the top of the tree. This made him very angry. He said, "What? How dare you throw these dry leaves upon my head?" With these words, he angrily looked at them, and a flash of fire went out. Such was the yogi's power, and burnt the birds to ashes. He was very glad, almost overjoyed at this development of power. He could burn the crow and the crane by a look. After a time, he had to go to town to beg his bread. He stood at a door and called out, "Woman, give me food." A voice came from inside the house, "Wait a little, my son." The young man thought, "You wretched woman, how dare you make me wait? You do not yet know my power." While he was thinking thus, the woman said again, "Boy, don't be thinking too much of yourself. Here is neither crow nor crane." He was astonished. Still he had to wait. At last the woman came, and he humbly said to her, "How did you know that?" She said, "My boy, I do not know your yoga or your other practices. I am a simple, ordinary woman. I made you wait because my husband is ill and I was nursing him. All my life I have struggled to do my duty. When I was unmarried, I did my duty to my parents. Now that I am married, I do my duty to my husband. That is all the yoga I practice. But by doing my duty, I have become illumined. Thus I could read your thoughts and know what you had done in the forest." She further told him that if he wanted to know something higher, he should go to the market of a certain town. There he would find a Vyada who would tell him something that he would be very glad to learn. A Vyada is one belonging to the lowest class of people who were mostly hunters and butchers. The sannyasin thought, "Why should I go to that town and to a Vyada?" But after what he had seen, his mind had opened a little, so he went. When he came to town, he found the market and there saw at a distance a big fat Vyada cutting meat with a big knife, talking and bargaining with different people. The young man said, "Lord, help me. Is this the man from whom I am going to learn? He is the incarnation of a demon if he is anything." In the meantime, the man looked up and said, "Oh, Swami, did a lady send you here? Take a seat until I have done my business." The sannyasin thought, "What comes to me here?" He took a seat, however. The man went on with his work, and after he had finished, he took his money and said to the sannyasin, "Come, sir, come to my home." On reaching home, the Vyada gave him a seat, saying, "Wait here," and he went into the house. He then bathed his old father and mother, fed them, and did all he could to please them, after which he came to the sannyasin and said, "Now, sir, you have come here to see me. What can I do for you?" The sannyasin asked him a few questions about the soul and about God, and the Vyada gave him a profound lecture. When the Vyada finished his teaching, the sannyasin was astonished. He said, "Why are you in that body? With such knowledge as yours, why are you in a Vyada's body and doing such filthy, ugly work?" "My son," replied the Vyada, "no duty is ugly, no duty is impure. My birth placed me in these circumstances and this environment. In my boyhood, I learnt the trade. I am unattached, and I try to do my duty well as a householder. I do all I can to make my mother and father happy. I neither know your yoga, nor have become a sannyasin, nor have I left the world to meditate in a forest. Nevertheless, all that I know has come to me through the unattached doing of the duty which belongs to my position." This is the end of the story by Vivekananda. It is a profound teaching. In this case, seeing things as they really are is seeing what is our dharma and our karma. When we look realistically at our karma and our dharma, we are beginning to see as our Holy Christ Self sees and would have us see. Our dharma is our reason for being. It is our duty, which we are impelled to fulfill. You do not pick your dharma, you are your dharma, and what you are dictates your duty. Some people do not want to strive to fulfill what is their dharma or duty in life. They want to step down a number of rungs on the ladder and do someone else's dharma that is much easier, that they themselves have mastered in a previous lifetime. They don't want to make the effort to rise to the level that is the calling from God in this life. We are also absolutely duty-bound to balance our karma and to live at the station of our karma, that is, until we balance it and move up the scale of being. As the enlightened butcher in this story explains, my birth placed me in these circumstances and this environment. I try to do my duty well. All that I know has come to me through the unattached doing of the duty which belongs to my position. The butcher is content to do his duty because he knows that when he has fulfilled one step of the great law, the law itself will guarantee him the next step. But some people willfully ignore the mandates of their karma. This is what I have observed as the conceit of ignorance. I think the conceit of ignorance is one of the conditions of consciousness that most vexes our beloved Guru El Morya. The conceit of ignorance makes people believe they are human gods, gods in their own right, petty tyrants who can control the elements of everyday life and nature itself. Often their hoarding of money reinforces this notion. With vast power and money at their disposal, they think they rule the world. And so with all of their karma and all of their absence of God mastery, some people still believe that they are the arbiters of their own destiny. You are not the arbiter of your own destiny until you are a karma-free being. And even then, you are not the arbiter of your own destiny. From the point when first you made karma the priority in your life became the balancing of that karma. So your karma took you away from being in a position of mandating your destiny, of being the arbiter of it. Your karma mandates your social position, your situation in life, what you are free to do and be, and what you are not free to do and be. And until your karma is balanced, the fulfillment of your divine plan may have to take a back seat. Both the old woman and the butcher put first things first. They put their karma and their duty to serve others first, and they went the extra mile to balance their karma and ensoul their dharma. You must also realize, as they did, that there is karma that you must absolutely balance in this lifetime, and you should move heaven and earth to do so. This is what we learned from Philos the Tibetan. Zalem had to wait 12 or 13,000 years in Devachan before he could re-embody. You'll recall that Devachan is the first 3 levels of the etheric octave. It's the place of wish fulfillment after one passes from the screen of life. So it can take that long for you and all the people you have karma with to come together under the right circumstances so that you and everyone you have karma with and everyone who has karma with you can balance that karma together. So people in the conceit of ignorance think that they can decide in what future time they will fulfill their responsibilities to this or that person whom they just don't feel like serving right now. People think they can decide when down the road of life they will have the child that they are now going to abort. People think they can decide when they will get around to doing this or that unenviable task of their karma. You know what? Those who are willfully ignorant are often the most conceited people you will find walking the earth. Just make sure you are no longer counted among them. Another insight I had from this story of the sannyasin is that one's duty to ensoul the Dharma is the duty to embody the body of Dharma, or the great Dharmakaya, which is the great causal body. our duty to bring the elements of our causal body into play in everything we do on earth. This is what our duty is, to draw down from that great causal body, to gain mastery through it, and to bless all life.
For more information, call toll-free 1-800-245-5445. The preceding program was presented by Summit University, Box 5000, Livingston, Montana, 59047 5000. If you'd like to know more, call this number or write this address.